And I'm really glad that she was able to come and be with me today. So thank you, Jean. So today I'm going to talk about three main areas in terms of what I wish I had known. And the first area has to do with writing itself. The second area has to do with what happens after you actually get the book published, or you publish it yourself, whatever. Is this microphone blinking off and on?
It's not the best.
Okay.
Or just hold it as close as you can, and fingers crossed.
All right, good. And then the third thing I want to talk about is the relationship with fans. And then I'm going to give a little list of possible suggestions that you all might find handy. And then I will be glad to answer any questions you have about either about my writing or about the new Dark Winds TV series that started in June. So when it came to writing, I think the first thing that I wish I had known before I wrote my book was that writing a really solid first draft that you send off to your editor is really just the beginning of that whole process. So I was lucky. Wait, I have to back up. Before, one reason that I didn't know a lot of this stuff was that I had never thought that I would be writing a novel. My original career was in journalism, and I loved journalism. And from there, like a lot of journalists, I segued into writing nonfiction. And I also really enjoyed writing nonfiction. And I kind of thought, because I had finished a full-length manuscript and actually worked with a publisher, that I knew a lot more about what it would be like to write a novel than I actually did. And so I guess one of the things I'm glad I didn't know was how little I knew when I jumped into the world of writing fiction. And the other thing, when I was growing up, my dad, Tony Hillerman, who's like a New Mexico icon, was a journalism professor. So, I looked at my dad as a journalist and a teacher, and he didn't publish his first novel until I was a junior in college. So I missed all, and I was living at home with him, but I didn't really get everything he went through publishing his first novel. So if I had it to do over again, I certainly would say to Dad, what advice would you give me, as a first novelist? But of course it didn't dawn on me I was be writing a novel until after my dad had died. So I know that sounds really dumb. And going back to Jean and me doing Word Harvest Writers workshops, when we were doing those workshops, my dad was in his late 70s. And several people, other writers, said to me, you ought to talk to your dad about continuing the series. Maybe he would like to have a co-writer. Maybe he'd like to have somebody help with research, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, never. It was really I thought kind of my dad's territory. And frankly, it was hard for me to imagine the world without my dad. And having taken that step would have been sort of the emotional recognition. Someday you're going to be on your own, and this lovely guy who you love isn't going to be around. So anyway, that was advice I wish I had taken when they suggested it, because I think it would have made my transition to writing fiction a lot easier. So anyway, I finished my first novel. I turned it in to a wonderful editor who had actually worked with my dad. And as I would have expected, she gave it back to me with like 20 pages of things. This could be better. This isn't in keeping with the series. This is unclear, all of that stuff. It was a pretty heavy duty edit. So I took a deep breath. I answered all her questions. I thought, oh, great. Now I'm done. No. Back. And this time it was only like 5 pages of corrections. So I took care of all those corrections. I sent it off again. And then I thought, yay, now I'm done. No. Then it goes to the copy editor. And the copy editors are really smart. And they say, so here on page 18, you have Bernadette Manuelito and Jim Chi, 2 of my main characters, having breakfast. And here on page 25, they're having lunch. Now, that's only 6 pages. What did they do to get so hungry? Oh, but anyway, copy editors are really wonderful because they save you from making a lot of embarrassing mistakes. So I think one thing that I kind of have gradually learned from all of this is that you need to celebrate each little victory. When you send out that first manuscript, instead of dreading how will it come back with those 25 pages of corrections, you just say, yay, I'm done with this part. And you go for a walk, or you have a glass of champagne, or you give your dog a bath, whatever you need to do to celebrate. And I wish I had known that. I think it would have made the whole process a little more joyful for me with that first book. So then the second thing that I seriously underestimated was how much effort has to go into the promotion part. And part of the reason I underestimated this was that I had kind of seen how my dad worked with this same big publisher. So now by the time I went on, I had my career in journalism. My mom and dad lived here in Albuquerque. I was living in Santa Fe. I would come down a couple times a month and we would have lunch and, do those lovely family things that you do. And sometimes my dad would talk to me. He'd say, well, I'm going to Chicago, and HarperCollins sent a car to pick me up. And then I got to the airport. They had taken care of all that. Then I got to Chicago, and there was somebody in the airport with a sign that said Hillerman. And then I got in the car, and then they took me to the hotel, and they picked me up, and we went to the radio interview, and blah, 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 all of that. I thought, oh, well, this is what happens with a big publisher. Well, it was what happened to my dad back in the 80s. But it was not what happened to me when my first book came out in 2013. What happened to me was that HarperCollins, the same publisher, said to me, oh, we have an invitation for you to go to Dallas Domestic, which is a lovely, lovely mystery conference in Maryland. And they paid for me to go. It was really, really nice. And then it was all up to me. And I should have been paying a little more attention to it, but I really was not. So then, like our lovely New Mexico bookstores would say, come and do a signing. And I would go, and they would have the books. Sometimes they did not have the books. That was one thing I also learned. You always have to have your own books. You all probably from SouthWest writers are a lot smarter about this than I was when I was learning this. The other thing I had really not expected was that part of being an author is really learning how to talk about your work and not being totally intimidated when you're looking at a room of 20 people or 50 people. And when I was sitting in the lobby, I heard that one of the talks that's coming up is exactly a talk about that. And that is one thing. Luckily, because Jean and I had been doing the Tony Hillerman Writers Workshops, I had had a chance to introduce speakers to talk a little bit in front of people, but it was easy because I wasn't talking about myself. I was talking about whoever I was introducing, like Joe. It's if you can kind of, not take it personally, it's a lot easier than when you're talking about your beloved child who you just spent a year creating, and now, your job is to kind of brag about yourself. I found that really, really difficult. But luckily, libraries, groups like SouthWest Writers are always looking for free speakers. Yes, when you get those invitations, eventually your terror level recedes a little bit, and you kind of learn what people like to hear. So I was lucky in that way, and I guess I'm glad that I didn't realize that was part of writing a book, because I think I might have maybe reconsidered, because I was, like most people in the world, really nervous about having to be a public speaker. But the other thing that I realized as I was going out talking about my books was that most people are there because they're really rooting for you to do well. I mean, they want to be entertained, but also, I mean, they say, here is, and I think writers particularly have that sort of spirit of generosity, and they say, here is somebody who started out just like me, and luck was with her, and, she's being able to talk to me. And so someday maybe that'll happen to me. So I think all of us kind of have that spirit of wanting to help other writers get ahead. And if you talk to at a library, of course, the other people there are people who love good books. And so if they're curious about your book and they want it to be a good book because they want something else to read. So that was one thing that kind of surprised me, I would say, was the generosity of the audiences to whom I was speaking. The other thing, going back to writing for a minute, the other thing that really flabbergasted me. So I'm working on my first novel, Spider-Woman's Daughter, and it's kind of going along okay. And I get this note from the publisher saying, we need you to write a 2-paragraph summary of your book for our salespeople. I'm thinking, oh, I don't know really quite what the book is even about yet. I'm not really a salesperson. So that was almost as hard as writing the book, to be able to succinctly put it into 2 paragraphs. And now that I have done that, I realize as I'm working on my new book, I need to think, okay, what are going to be the points that the sales staff at HarperCollins is going to like to glom onto when they go to talk to the distributors or the bookstores that report to the New York Times list or whatever. So now I'm a little more savvy, but that just really floored me. So I would say to you guys, as you're working, when you have to take off your author's hat, then you can put on your salesperson hat and think, what is it about this book that really the salespeople, the bookstores, the internet marketing people, what is it about this book that's really going to get their attention? And for a couple of my books, actually what they've had on the sales site hasn't been exactly how the book came out. Because there are some people who are fortunate enough to be able to write from outlines. And I think they can probably handle this better than those of us who just kind of wing it till we get to the end. But I mean, a lot of that, I think people, when the salespeople for those bookstores bought it, they were thinking it was going to be a book about X. And when it comes in, it's a book kind of about X minus 52 or I don't know what. The other thing that I wish I had known was really how many opportunities there are to talk about your books. I mean, and particularly with Zoom, I think that has been, even though I would much rather talk to live people, it's been such a boon to be able to be in your own living room and only spend an hour instead of having to travel and deal with electronics, to be able to reach out to larger audiences. So, and all kinds of clubs are looking for speakers. So I guess one thing that I didn't realize before I wrote my first book was how many opportunities there were to say yes, to chances to interact with other writers and with fans and with readers. And I would say particularly for new writers or people new in the issue of being your own marketer, just say yes. Just say yes. And, maybe it'll be good. I had an invitation to go up to Eagle's Nest to talk to the Eagle's Nest Public Library. Now, the population of Eagle's Nest is about 300. And so my good friend Dave and I are driving up there, and he says to me, how many people do you think will be at this talk? I say, well, there'll be the librarian. There will probably be her husband or partner or somebody who's going to be setting up the tables. So that's 2. And then there may be somebody who wants me to sign a book for her mom. So that'll be 3. And then maybe a few other people who, got bored. I said maybe 6. He said, oh no, I think there'll be at least 8. And this was right after those awful fires in Las Vegas too. So I'm thinking, not only, this is probably not going to be my best event. So we get there, I'm using the GPS on my phone, and it gives me directions to the Eagle Nest Library. So we get to the library and there are 2 cars in the parking lot. Well, but they want me there half an hour early. I think, oh, this is okay. People are still having their dinner. But then the door was locked. But as it turned out, they had moved the talk to the community center because of all the fires, the community center, it was like twice as big as this room, but half of it was full of tables with disposable diapers and boxes of cereal, food for people who were being evacuated, and also support for all of the hundreds of firefighters who were working on that blaze. So anyway, we go to the community center and I'm thinking, well, this is going to be really interesting. But I noticed there are cars outside, and as it turned out, there were 40 people at that talk. Good for Eagles Nest. And I think some of it is in little towns, there is not a lot of competition, shall we say. But those people were wonderful. They had such great questions, and it was an extra gift to drive up to that beautiful part of northern New Mexico. So I was glad that I had said yes to Eagles Nest. And Jean has gone with me on some of these, and we've had quite a few exciting adventures going to little towns where you think nobody cares, and actually there are really avid readers. I know we went to Quemado. It was the Quemado Historical Society. And those people were, I mean, most of them were probably 60 at the youngest, but they were avid readers, and it was just, the whole thing was delightful. So I would say, if any of us really were interested in making money, we wouldn't have become writers in the first place. So we have to work for the joy of sharing our stories with other people, and just for the joy of the creative process itself. So while I'm talking about giving talks, when I was first giving talks, I had I was giving talks on my nonfiction book, the Tony Hillerman landscape book. And as part of doing that, I had a slideshow because it was landscapes. And my late husband was a wonderful photographer. So several times we would go to give talks, and our laptop would not connect to the projector, or the light bulb burned out on the projector, or you can imagine just all of those technical things. And the first few times it happened, I just kind of had to wing it with just talking. And then it dawned on me that I had some prints of those photos. So I just stuck them in the trunk of my car, and people were usually disappointed that there weren't slides, but just being able to see the pictures as I was talking made a big difference. And I would say anybody who is writing fiction with a setting that's kind of interesting, if you take some photos of it and bring them with you, it gives people something else to think about while you're talking. So let's see what else I was going to say. Radio. Okay, one thing, radio people have a lot of time to fill, particularly, and they often like to interview authors, which is sort of a good thing, except because they're busy, they often don't have time to read your book, if they even have your book. So chances are all they will have is that little 2-paragraph thing that you wrote when you had been working on your book a month, and it may not really have anything to do with the book that you actually have written. So for radio, since my background was journalism, I was used to asking the questions. I wasn't used to answering questions. So someone would ask me a question, and I would kind of start with the background, and then sort of work my way up, and then the time would be over. And I thought, oh my gosh, I never even mentioned the name of my book. So for a while, it dawned on me that I needed to have talking points, and that the main purpose of those interviews was to be entertaining, not to do a plot summary, not to give my background, but just to give people a few kind of quick, funny anecdotes. And then hopefully, and to say the name of the book and my name a few times. And then maybe if they were really curious or bored, or I was lucky, they might go out and at least look on Amazon and see if the book was there, if they didn't have a local bookstore, which I love better. Okay, let's see what else. Another thing that I learned was to really take advantage of all my friends. Like if I was doing a talk and I was concerned nobody might come, to just say, here it is, help me spread the word, to kind of do that kind of networking. And once I was doing a talk at the old Page One on, I think it was on Eubank, and something had gone wrong, let me just say. So I show up, and my mom is there, and my brother is there, And this woman is there who was doing an auction, and I told her I would give her a free book, and the staff was there. That was it. That was it. And I was rather surprised, but again, it was kind of good practice in terms of giving a talk and not having a very supportive audience, of course, and not being nervous. And afterwards, the staff apologized and they said, well, I don't know what it was. We thought that the 13th was a Thursday and actually was a Tuesday, or we thought somebody was putting it in our newsletter and they didn't, but things happen. And I think all of us, we just have to kind of not take it personally and just figure, that's sort of what life is about. So let's see. Oh, okay. So now I want to talk a little bit about fans. That was, I think, the other thing that really surprised me was how avid, once people find your work and really like it, how they may know more about your stories than you do. They do not hesitate, as a lot of you have probably already learned, they don't hesitate to tell you what mistakes you have made or what you could have done better, or to ask you like sort of embarrassing questions about oversights. And I think probably the most embarrassing thing, two of the most embarrassing things that happened to me, one fan, this was in my book that just came out, Sacred Bridge. And the letter started out very politely. And she said, I thought it was so touching when you mentioned that this young man's mother had died. She said, so then I was surprised 15 pages later when you mentioned how he's going to visit her. He said, oh, you are a very astute reader. There was nothing, I mean, I had read it, I don't know how many times. My editor had read it, my beta readers had read it, and none of us caught it. So I think one thing you just figure, no matter how much you try to have everything, all the loose ends tied up to have everything right, there are bound to be things that will escape you. And it's just sort of a good lesson in humility and, trying again. I mean, it's why you write the next book, so you won't be bringing back people from the dead. Oh, the other thing I love about is that sometimes they will send you things. I had somebody send me a picture. I had done some kind of a post on Facebook about little libraries. And so this guy wrote me a text back. He said, oh, my dog loves little libraries. He said, can I send you a picture? I said, oh, sure. So he sends me a picture of his dog, and there's a post, and it's a stick library. There's like, his dog has a stick. I was doing a talk in Berlin, and afterwards, this very, very intense young guy came up. Like he was maybe in his 30s, and he had his wife and his baby were there. He said, "Oh, I really like you. I made you something special." It was a duck egg. It was maybe this big, and inside he had carved a nativity scene. It's like it was a special thing, but it was kind of a weird thing at the same time. Anyway, fans are great. I have to say that was one thing I really was not expecting, was the wonderful reception. I was nervous actually because my dad had so many fans, and I thought, here I am stepping into unknown territory as a first-time writer. These people probably know these stories as well or better than I do. And if I screw up, they're going to let me know. So I think a lot of people, when they're writing, their first novel, their family reads it. Their high school friends might read it. Their neighbors might read it. Maybe people in their church. But it's not like, my dad with all of these fans who none of us ever even knew except that they were fans. But thankfully, Dad's fans gave me a chance. And I am just forever grateful for that. So let's see. Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk about was criticism. And that kind of goes right with fans. One of the first talks I did was in Salt Lake City at a bookshop called The King's English. And of course I was nervous because I had hardly given any talks. And there's this elderly man in the first row, and he asks the first question. And I'm thinking, oh, what will this question be? And he says, I just had one question for you about your dad. I said, what was it? he said, why did he get, why every time did he mention a gun, did he get it wrong? Well, I don't know. And having heard that question now, I am very hesitant to say anything specific about guns. I just kind of say gun, about his gun. I mean, I don't even want to say pistol or rifle. It's like, I'm sure, because I mean, I know a little bit about guns, but there are people out there who know so much about guns. I just don't want to, I don't want to take a chance on getting it wrong. In Song of the Lion, I had a character who was living with diabetes, which he's a Navajo guy. It's a huge problem on the Navajo Nation, diabetes. So I have a scene where this gentleman is not feeling well because of his diabetes. And so I have him eat something, eat something sweet. And I got so many letters from people saying, no, 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 no. Based on his symptoms, he really needed more insulin. And I felt terrible about that. And so I talked, this was my first editor. I said, golly, how did this get by us? She said, I don't know. She said, I'm going to ask my neighbor who's a nurse. And she asked her neighbor, and her neighbor said, you know, it's a complicated issue. And what your writer should have done was been more specific about the symptoms, and then it would have worked out better. But again, it's like you don't even know what you don't know. And that was one thing I didn't know. And so I got it wrong. And there are many other examples of that in my books, which I am not going to embarrass myself. One thing that I also didn't know when I started writing was how much research is involved in writing fiction. And also, I guess the auxiliary statement to that is that fiction, for me, fiction is just a wonderful rainbow rabbit hole. I mean, I can spend the book I just finished has a paleontology as one of the plots. And so I did a lot of research about dinosaurs at Bears Ears, and about common fossils that are found there, and about how fossils that give us clues to how species adapt to changing climates. And it finally dawned on me that I was not writing a book about dinosaurs, that I was supposed to be writing a mystery in which the paleontology part was just like, you know, one of the plot points. So, but anyway, so I guess my tip is, it's fun to be learning things. So when you're thinking of starting a story or continuing a story, readers love to have things, to learn things besides following the plot, to have in the book, to learn things that they don't know. So it's really important, I think, for making our books interesting, to add that. But it needs to be something that you're really interested in too, but also something that you can either back away from, or that you can say, well, I'm going to take all these notes and write a book for junior high school kids about dinosaurs or whatever, you know, but not to get so trapped in that research that you forget the main thing you're doing is writing a novel. So let me look here at my little notes. Oh, talking about fans. The other thing, since the Dark Winds television has come out, you know, AMC released it in June. And I have to say, I was nervous about this. It's kind of like sending your kids off to first grade, and you think, how will they come back? What's going to happen to them? But in fact, I'm really pleased with the way the writers, the producers, the actors, with the respect with which they treated the integrity of my dad's books. However, as you all know, TV is far different than a novel. So after the series came out, I got a lot of rather angry fan mails from people saying, how could you let them cast an actress who's 5'10" as Bertie Manuelito? Don't you remember she's only 5'2"? and how come Jim Chi is now in the FBI? He was never in the FBI. They were valid points for people who really had closely read the books. And all I could say was, number one, even though they have my name there as executive producer, I really did nothing except sign a contract saying, go ahead and turn these stories into movies. But the second thing was, I think they really were true to the integrity of the characters. I mean, sure, Bernie Manuelito is now as tall as me instead of being short and a little more round. But still, her character, I mean, she's a very strong, problem-solving, professional policewoman. And I really liked that about her. And I think the way they cast the Jolie Pern character with a very, very good actor. So, I was happy with it. But it's interesting to see these questions because it gives me insight into really how seriously people took like every word in my dad's novels and how they feel almost possessive about these characters who they've known for 50 years or more, some of them. So anyway, that was an interesting experience for me. I'm going to stop in just a minute and take some questions from you, but I think the other things that I'm glad I didn't know at that I'm glad I kind of did know at the beginning. And one was that it's sort of good to start out with low expectations. And frankly, when I wrote Spider-Woman's Daughter, I thought, I have to write this book because I can't see the series end with Bernadette Manuelito as the sweet girlfriend. I have to bring this strong character up to her potential as a full-fledged crime solver. And even if nobody reads this book except me and my mom, I got to get this book done. And so I was writing it really for the challenge of it, for learning how to write a novel as I was writing a novel, and just for kind of the commitment to seeing this character have a good conclusion. And the other thing that I didn't realize, but that really helped me, was knowing a lot of other writers. Having been the workshops that Jean and I did, which led me to, even though I wasn't thinking of writing a novel, some of our presenters were J.A. Jance, Michael McGarity, David Morrell, Margaret Cole, people, Steve Havel, people who really knew how to write, knew how to do dialogue, knew how to build characters. So listening to them talk about their work, really, it kind of infused itself somehow in my consciousness. And if I were starting again, I think I would have really worked even harder on building those connections, because I think it would have made it a lot easier for me when I wrote that first novel. And I really commend you all for being part of SouthWest Writers. I think this is such a wonderful organization for providing you information and contacts and the networking that can really help you write the best books you can write. So I'm going to stop talking in just a minute. But the other thing that I would have done, I think, would have been to have asked my dad for more tips, as I mentioned earlier. And my dad didn't believe in writer's block. He often said, if you're working along and you come to a stuck place, you just need to keep working at it. One thing that has helped me when I come to those stuck places is to have some to kind of be working on the plot and the subplot at the same time. So when I get to that stuck place, I can, if it's in the main plot, I can go back to the subplot that has to do with Darlene and her mom. Or maybe I can go back, say in The Way of the Bear, I could go back to talking a little more about the paleontology and just let that part of my brain that seems to be spinning on idle relax a little bit. And then, sometimes an idea will come to me. And sometimes the other thing, and I kind of learned this from my dad too. My dad basically just typed out his stories. He did very little rewriting, but he spent a long time thinking about them. And when I was growing up, we had a low coffee table in our living room. And often I would see him there playing solitaire. He would play with two decks. The cards would all be spread out, very focused on it. And I could remember a couple times, particularly as a teenager, I would have burning ideas or suggestions or something going on in my life I had to tell him. And my mom would, kind of pause me at the doorway and say, "Oh, don't talk to your dad now. He's working." I said, "Well, it looks like he's playing cards to me, Mom." In fact, playing solitaire was his way of disengaging that editor that tells you, "This doesn't make sense. This is really dumb. You'll never be a writer. Why don't you do something else?" We all have those little voices. And that voice then was busy saying, you know, red on black, 5 on 4, ace on king, move this pile over here. So then his creative voice was working out the story. So I think one thing that Dad always told me was that writing is hard work, and you shouldn't do it if you're not having fun with it. And so I would say that that has kind of been my mantra, and I mean, it's not always fun, but in the end, it has been fun. And it's always fun to talk to people like you guys. So thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm going to get a little sip of water, and then I'd be glad to answer any questions.